I suddenly ran across my classmate Sarah at the anniversary celebration for my company. However, Sarah simply made fun of me for working in a factory. Please don't approach us if you see us. She seemed to enjoy the taunts. My husband is a Harvard-educated director, way above someone low and incompetent like you, she remarked. Her remarks evoked unpleasant memories of my time in middle school. Sarah used to make fun of me for being impoverished back then. I felt as though my patience had finally reached a breaking point. Well, your husband will be unemployed from tomorrow, I replied. My unexpected remarks startled Sarah, but she quickly dismissed them as a joke. But she and her spouse would soon realize what I had really meant. David Young is my name. This year is my 42nd birthday. My wife Annie and I were married after meeting at work. This year marks our 15th wedding anniversary, and I have never had a serious dispute with Annie, who is kind and focused on her family. We have a quiet existence together, and I'm constantly thankful to Annie for her unwavering support. My firm decided to have an anniversary party one day. It was going to be a major event because this year is the 50th anniversary, and I was excited about it. Annie picked out a suit and tie for me, and I prepared to leave on the day of the anniversary. Annie was dressed in a light-colored dress and had her hair done wonderfully in the morning. She said, "How do I look, David?" "You look incredibly beautiful," I said. Perhaps because of my prejudice, her graceful beauty captivated me. I made my way to the location with Annie at my side. We booked a rather large space, and as we approached, we noticed more individuals making their way there. It's typical for a big corporation's anniversary party to have so many invitees. Yeah, there must be hundreds of people invited, Annie replied. We went into the venue and waited for the event to begin while talking to Annie. There were already plenty of individuals inside, meeting one another and introducing themselves. The more competent staff members are keen to network because company gatherings are essentially an opportunity for self-promotion. I was introducing myself to guests when I was abruptly approached. "Is that you, David?" "Nor, Sarah?" Sarah, one of my middle school classmates, was standing directly in front of me. She was staring at me as if to make fun of me. After almost 30 years, Sarah, who has been the class's beauty and focus of attention since she was a young child, continued to look stunning. But suddenly, when she narrowed her eyes and snarled at me, her attractiveness diminished. "David, it's been a long time. Now, what are you doing? Since you never attend reunions, everyone is concerned about you," Sarah said to me in a derisive manner. To be honest, I wasn't particularly exceptional in my class in middle school. I hadn't inquired, but Sarah, apparently unaware of this, continued to chat with a hypocritically happy laugh. "My marriage ended 5 years ago. My husband is a top employee who, until recently, oversaw a branch abroad. He is now even receiving recognition for his exceptional work." That's fantastic. I was shocked to learn that Sarah's husband was employed by this organization and responded, "Congratulations." I continued to offer my compliments, but Sarah scowled for some reason. "You don't have to give me any congratulations. What sort of work are you doing here? Are you connected to the business?" "I am," I started. However, Sarah dismissed the subject with a wave of her hand before I could clarify. "It's not significant, so never mind. You are a middle school graduate who most likely works in a factory owned by a subcontractor." "I do go to the factory, indeed." I opened my mouth to say something else, but Sarah had already turned away. She no longer cared about me. "A worker in a factory like you has no business being here." As she turned to face Brandon, who must be her husband, she whispered, "Just keep quiet in the corner and don't embarrass yourself." While I thought it was petty, I made sure to remember his name. Sarah mocked me for being a middle school graduate, but to be precise, that's not entirely true. When I was in middle school, my mom got seriously ill, and my dad lost his job due to the recession. From that day, my life changed completely. My dad, once a diligent employee, started drinking and gambling to escape from the harsh reality. Soon, we ran out of money and had to sell our house, moving into a small, old, one-bedroom apartment. As a middle schooler, I grew taller but couldn't afford new uniforms or sportswear, so I had to make do with hand-me-downs from relatives. This made me a target for ridicule by my classmates. I was called poor and uncool. Sarah, beautiful and bossy, was the ringleader, even instructing the entire class not to talk to me. She was the popular girl in class, and no one dared to go against her, so her bullying continued until we graduated. On graduation day, Sarah called me over and asked with a sneer, "Which high school are you going to? It would be good if you could get a hand-me-down uniform." I was so annoyed by her persistent teasing that I retorted, "I won't need a uniform for the high school I'm going to." "Not going to high school? Just working after middle school?" she asked. "Yay, that's right. I'm going to work after graduating middle school," I replied. Hearing my response, Sarah burst into laughter. "Can't believe you don't even have the money to go to high school. Well, do your best to earn your pennies," she said. As a middle school graduate, I left without replying to her. What I told Sarah wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't completely false either. I attended a night high school while working during the day. My dad was still drowning in alcohol, and my mom, who was doing piecework, kept going in and out of the hospital, so I had no one to rely on. After graduating middle school, I desperately looked for a job, but there were hardly any companies willing to hire a middle school graduate. The only place that hired me was the machine manufacturing factory where I work now. I've always loved tinkering with machines, so I threw myself into this job. I worked during the day and attended high school at night. Balancing work and study was tough, but I managed thanks to the encouragement from my older colleagues. They taught me the ropes at work and even treated me to lunch sometimes, treating me like their own son. Years went by as I worked, supported by everyone. After finally graduating high school, I planned to continue working at the factory as an employee, but my senior colleagues advised me otherwise. "Now that you've graduated high school, try to study as much as you can," they suggested. They told me about scholarship programs and direct company support for employees. I was surprised and grateful for their concern, so I went to college. I chose a university department related to my company's business and gained strength by acquiring various certifications and researching specialized fields. After graduating from college, I returned to the company. A few years later, at 25, I encountered a turning point at work. I met Annie, who would become my wife. Annie was kind to everyone and had a lovely smile, and I gradually developed a fondness for her. It turned out that she was also interested in me. She asked me out on a date, and that's how our relationship began. A few years later, we happily got married and built a warm family together. Throughout such a life full of ups and downs, I had completely forgotten about being harassed in middle school. So when Sarah approached me at the venue today, I was genuinely surprised. Seeing my distressed look, Annie looked at me worriedly. After I briefly explained the situation, Annie tightly grasped my hand. "No matter what anyone says, I know you're a wonderful person, David. Let's stay confident and enjoy the company's anniversary party." "Yeah, you're right." Encouraged by her supportive words, I squeezed her hand back. Thus, we decided to wait for the party to start. After exchanging greetings with everyone, the hustle and bustle finally settled down. Thinking of resting until the start time, I moved towards the wall with Annie. "Oh, you're still here?" There were Sarah and her husband, whom I had just parted ways with. I was a bit surprised to bump into them so unexpectedly, but I sincerely congratulated her husband, Brandon. "Brandon, I heard you're an outstanding employee, getting an award today. Congratulations!" But instead of responding, Brandon just looked me over as if appraising me. "Is this the factory worker classmate you were talking about?" he asked. He has the audacity to attend the company's anniversary party despite being a mere worker. Sarah returned the words with a bitter expression. Then Brandon, ignoring my presence, curiously asked Sarah, "But for a factory worker, he's wearing a nice suit." "I'm an elite, so I'm quite particular about suits," he continued. "Even if he tries hard to wear a good suit, it's ruined because he's a lowly worker. It's truly embarrassing to have someone like him as a classmate." Frowning, Sarah spat out her words, and Brandon inquired further. "Embarrassing, huh? Imagine he's been a factory worker since dropping out of middle school. That's 30 years of being a mere worker." "Wow, really? That's unbelievable." Sarah pointed and laughed at me. Brandon leaned back, distancing himself as if amused. They both looked down on me with obvious disdain, then glanced at the person next to me. There stood Annie, watching the two of them intently. So this bottom-of-the-barrel worker, even though he's a dropout, managed to get married? Sarah asked. What does your wife do? I answered honestly. She works in the same field as me. We met at work. At that moment, Sarah and Brandon looked at each other and burst out laughing. A couple both sweating it out in the field doing menial work. Perfect match for an incompetent dropout like you, they mocked. I couldn't understand how they could say such awful things to my wife, a stranger to them. As I stood there stunned, Sarah blurted out, "But if I were you, I'd be too miserable to even mention working in a factory. Yeah, for an elite like me, it's unimaginable to live such a lowly life. Please stop talking like that." I retorted angrily to their cruel insults. But Sarah looked at me as if I were something dirty and turned her back. Brandon shooed me away as if swatting a fly. If we keep talking to you, people might think I'm a local class worker like you. Could you go somewhere else? Talking to someone lowly like you might rub off on me. I was boiling with anger at such rude behavior, but as a grown-up, I couldn't just let my emotions take over and start yelling. So I tried hard to hold it in. However, Sarah seemed to mock my feelings and hurled more disdainful words. From now on, if you see us, don't come close, okay? My husband is a Harvard-educated director, way different from a lowly, incompetent person like you. Her words, enjoying the harassment, brought back painful middle school memories. Back then, and even now, Sarah acted arrogantly, thinking she wouldn't be retaliated against. I felt like I heard the sound of my patience snapping inside. Well, your husband will be unemployed from tomorrow. Sarah was taken aback by my unexpected words, staring with wide eyes. As I stared back expressionlessly, she laughed it off, pretending. My husband unemployed? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Why would a mere factory worker like you have any power over my husband? That's because I'm the president of the company. For a moment, Sarah was dumbfounded, then suddenly burst into loud laughter. You the president? Don't be silly. Are you just saying that because my husband is a Harvard-educated director and you want to one-up him? It's not a lie, I said seriously. But Sarah clearly didn't believe a word. Then Brandon looked back and forth between me and Annie standing by my side and shrugged in disbelief. Married to a husband who spouts such fantasies. She must be quite the wife. Aren't you embarrassed to stand beside such a man? After spitting out those words, Brandon and Sarah hardly left together. As I watched their backs, I trembled with anger. The person who had harassed me so much in middle school was still treating me this way, even now as an adult. And it wasn't just me they were mocking. Annie in my workplace, too. I couldn't stay silent any longer. As I was about to step forward in anger to call them back, a gentle hand was placed on my shoulder. I heard everything, but it's not good to reprimand them here. However, I couldn't just back down, especially after they laughed at me. As I looked at her, I was taken aback by her unexpected expression. She wore a mischievous smile. I have a good idea hearing Anne's plan. I nodded deeply, feeling a sense of relief. When the announcement for the party start was made, we moved to our assigned seats. The event began on time, and the employees started singing the company anthem. In my peripheral vision, I saw Sarah and Brandon singing along as well. After checking with the organizers, it turned out that Brandon was indeed being recognized as an outstanding employee. Along with several other distinguished employees, he was escorted to a special seat with his family. Imagining what was about to happen, I suppressed a rising chuckle. After the anthem, the entertainment part started. There were performances by a magician and comedians summarizing the company's history in a skit, filling the room with a festive atmosphere. As the entertainment ended, the host led the applause and continued with the ceremony. Next, we'll have a speech from the president and CEO. Mr. Yum, the host announced. Upon those words, I began to walk slowly to the stage. As I stood on the stage, I looked over the gathered crowd, expressing my gratitude while everyone listened intently. Only two people were the exception, Sarah and Brandon. They were staring at me, mouths agape in shock. Even from the stage, I could see their mouths moving. Why? Why is he speaking? It can't be true, he's the president. I imagined that's what they were muttering. I continued speaking. Normally, we would now proceed to the ceremony for awarding outstanding employees. However, before that, I have an announcement to make. One of the awardees, the director who was assigned to our overseas branch, Brandon, will be dismissed from his position effective today. The room was enveloped in silence in an instant. As I tried to continue with a smile, the host approached me. "What is your reasoning for this?" the host asked, appearing confused. It was then that Sarah suddenly stood up and shouted, "That's a lie, everyone. This man was just a classmate from my middle school. He's just a mere factory worker. Why is he standing there? Yeah, this must be some kind of prank. But this taste in entertainment is terrible, right, everyone?" With her shrill voice, Sarah spat out these words. Next to her, Brandon grinned smugly, looking back and forth between me and Sarah, bursting into a brazen laugh. The guests in the room started murmuring, enveloped in a tense atmosphere. I continued speaking calmly. Sarah just mentioned earlier that working in a factory is a lowly job. She also told me not to talk to her anymore, fearing that the loudness would rub off on her. So, what? Sarah glared back at me, hands on her hips, still refusing to admit a wrongdoing. I work for this company. I cannot continue working with someone who is ashamed of our work. But my husband is an elite director, completely different from you in this charade. At that moment, the executive director, Ethan, rushed to the award seat, his face flushed with anger. He started yelling at Brandon, "Hey, apologize to Mr. Young right now." However, Sarah and Brandon, still half smiling, refused to believe Ethan's words. "What's wrong, Ethan? Why should we apologize to some factory worker? He's just a lowly, incompetent worker. He's just trying to scare us by lying about firing my husband." But Ethan shouted back, his voice trembling, "State the name of our company. Young High-Tech Corporation." "Young. Oh," muttered Brandon suddenly, realizing. His face turned pale. His name? David Young. Could it be? He's really our company's president? At Brandon's words, Sarah froze in shock. During this time, I had been watching them. Judging that they finally understood, I spoke again. "It seems you finally believe me." Brandon, his face ashen, was shaking all over, hardly able to stand from his chair. In fact, Hanny is the daughter of a major manufacturer that produces some of the leading semiconductor devices in the country. The company that accepted me, a middle school grad, was one of her parents' factories. At that time, it was still a mid-sized company, taking on various machinery productions. But 30 years ago, it developed its first proprietary product, a microcrater meter, and has since expanded its business with the advancement of electronic device technology. Now, alongside semiconductor manufacturing, we're collaborating with foreign companies to develop even more precise testing systems. Combining the knowledge I gained in college with a practical perspective, I actively participated in product development after graduating, resulting in several hit products. Thanks to this, I was transferred to the headquarters and promoted to Director of Electronic Hardware Development. And that's where I met Annie. Even after our marriage, Annie's family never spoke of my past. Attending night high school instead, they warmly accepted me as a diligent and enthusiastic young man, rare in this era. Wanting to repay this family and the company that raised me, I devoted myself to my work without distraction. Then, 2 years ago, when Annie's father retired, I took over as the president. Understanding the truth. Brandon looked like he was about to collapse, and Ethan addressed him even more desperately. "You were overseas, so you might not have known directly, but at least check the information about the company you work for." That is Brandon. His face, still pale, tried to stammer an excuse. But Ethan, his face red with anger, kept yelling. "You're so caught up in being an elite from Harvard University that you don't even know the face of our president. I'm ashamed that I recommended someone like you as an outstanding employee." Ethan then grabbed Brandon by the scruff of his neck and dragged him in front of me. Ethan forcefully bowed Brandon's head and then joined him in kneeling down. "I deeply apologize for the disrespectful behavior of my subordinate. Please forgive us. I'm so sorry for my ignorance. It's inexcusable. Brandon finally knelt down of his own accord, his face turning bright red as sweat dripped onto the floor. Anyone who had been watching this unfold turned to me with a question. Jess, this was a plan Annie had come up with. David, what will you do now? You've revealed the truth in front of everyone. To avoid being accused of unilaterally firing an employee. Yeah, well, he's fired someone who insults a person they've just met like that. Definitely doesn't fit in with our company, I replied. As I said this, Brandon fell silent, his forehead dripping with sweat. Ethan quickly spoke up. I apologize for my wrong judgment causing such inconvenience. I'll refrain from suing for defamation since he has apologized. Let's fire him and put an end to this commotion. Hearing my words, Ethan seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the situation was resolved. But the next voice came from Sarah, who had been dumbfoundedly watching everything. Her face flushed with anger, she lashed out at me. I don't care if you're the president or whatever. Why do you get to act so high and mighty? Furious and almost panting, Sarah was met with my calm response. Before you criticize others, maybe you should worry about your own life. With your husband fired, you'll lose your income and won't be able to live luxuriously anymore. Sarah, upon hearing my words, finally seemed to grasp her situation, standing frozen, her lips quivering. Annie, glancing at her, whispered to me, David, let's have those people leave now. Yeah, you're right. It's a special anniversary party after all. We need to make sure everyone who came enjoys it. I instructed the staff to escort Brandon, who was still kneeling, and Sarah, pale-faced and rigid, out of the venue. After they left, we refreshed the atmosphere of the venue and successfully concluded the party. Brandon repeatedly tried to apologize, but I dismissed them. Having an employee who looks down on others just because of Sarah's words could eventually lead to issues at work. Brandon, who had been fired, suffered greatly since he had already purchased a luxurious home and car on loan, relying on his salary. Sarah, who always loved a lavish lifestyle and apparently never saved much, found their finances in dire straits. Within months, unable to pay the enormous loans, the couple eventually had to sell their house and car and move to a shabby apartment. Brandon struggled to find a new job, losing both money and status, leading to endless quarrels in their now impoverished household. Eventually, they divorced and now live separately. Brandon, desperate for a job, finally found work as a factory worker. He spends his days standing in front of a conveyor belt, endlessly assembling machines as part of a repetitive process. Meanwhile, Sarah became a topic of discussion among her local classmates for her actions towards me. Abandoned even by her family, she now lives alone, struggling to afford meals. Her once prized beauty faded away, and she's barely making ends meet by working night jobs. As for Annie and me, we continue to live happily. Our focus on developing excellent employees led to stable and growing company performance. Just as the company helped me, I now aim to fulfill the hopes of the younger generation. We've enhanced our educational programs and training systems for our employees, which has already led to the creation of an innovative new product. This product is expected to be a significant step forward for our company. But it's not just a new product that was born. Annie and I also welcomed a beautiful daughter. In her family, she is overjoyed and adored. I'm so glad I met you. I'm truly happy. Me too. When I graduated from middle school, I thought my life was over. But by never giving up on my potential and tirelessly searching for a path, I've been helped by many and now lead such a happy life. I want to continue delivering products that make the world a better place as a way to give back. With this resolve in my heart, I smiled at my precious family.